I've been following Australian rules football ever since I was a young boy, and the team that I follow in the AFL are the Fremantle Dockers. Now, AFL, like any other sport around the world, involves two teams coming together. They try to score goals and points against each other, and the team at the end of the game who has the highest score wins the game. But something happens in AFL, particularly in the fourth quarter, where commentators start talking about a third team. And the third team is the clock. You'll actually hear commentators talk about the team trying to beat the clock, trying to get another score in to make sure they're in front when the game ends. But the clock keeps ticking down. You can't slow the clock down. You can't manipulate the clock. The clock is going to end at some point, and when it ends, the game is over. Now, in many ways, AFL mimics life. There is also a clock of life that is ticking over. The players may end a game, they'll come back the following week and they'll play, but as the years go on, those players eventually get to the point where their bodies have become worn down through age. And when the clock ends, they have to retire from the sport. And you see these players retire, and sometimes they go off to work in commentary or they might coach a team. And over the years, you see these mighty fit players starting to look older, getting greyer hair, being worn down. But they cannot beat the clock. The clock of life is ticking continually and cannot be stopped. Now, in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark and Luke, there's an account of a man who comes to Christ. He's commonly known as the rich young ruler. He has those three attributes which everyone wants in life: money, power, and youthfulness. But this guy comes to Christ because he wants to ask Jesus, how do I get eternal life? And I think this young guy has been doing some thinking. He's looked at his life and he says, okay, I've got everything society would want someone to have. I've got money, I've got power, I've got youth, but I cannot beat the clock. The clock of life is ticking on. I can't slow it down. I can't manipulate it. And eventually it's going to catch up with me. So he comes to Christ specifically about this topic of eternal life. How can I access that to extend my life beyond the grave? And when he comes to Jesus, Jesus asks him a question. He asks him a question about the Ten Commandments. But Christ is quite specific. He asks him only about 5 types of commandments. The commandment of murder, the commandment of adultery, the commandment of stealing, the commandment of lying, the commandment of honouring your mother and father. And he says to the man, have you followed those commandments? And this man very sincerely says, yes, I have followed those commandments. I think it's in Mark's gospel, it says then Jesus looks at him and loves him. Jesus can see the sincerity in this man's answer. But then Jesus says to him, okay, go and take everything you have and sell it and come and follow me then. Then you will have eternal life. It's at that point the rich young ruler simply walks away depressed and sad. That request of Christ to him to give up everything to get eternal life, well, he can't do that. How can he give up all this money he has? How can he give up all this authority he has? This is the thing that he has accumulated in life. He is privileged to have this. Why should he surrender all that to have eternal life? And he walks away sad. But the disciples and the people nearby who've heard this, they are completely taken back. The disciples are almost on the brink of terror at this point, and they say to Christ, if that's what you need to do to get eternal life, then who on earth can get eternal life? No one will get it. No one's going to walk away from everything they've got, particularly if you've got lots of money, or you're going to walk away from your position of authority or power. Why would you do that? We are boxed now into a corner of a no-win situation. What Christ is trying to do here is trying to illustrate both to this rich young ruler, but also to the disciples and the people listening, something about eternal life. When someone receives eternal life from God, that gift that is given to them, when someone knows that when they die, their existence continues on in the presence and in the history of God's kingdom beyond the grave, that changes the way you live life now. The things that culture may be telling you is important to have in your life, money or power, you will realize they aren't that important. And your focus will begin to look at different things. Christ is saying to this rich young man, if you receive eternal life, the very things you have pursued in your life, power, money, these will not become important to you anymore. Effectively, you will give them up once you see yourself as having eternal life. The commandments that Jesus gives to this young man are quite specific. He only gives him 5 of the commandments because the other half are all about the relationship we have with God. Once we receive eternal life now, we go into an eternal relationship with God, one that continues beyond the grave because God desires for us to be with him. You know, we live in a culture which is just so obsessed with trying to live this life as it is right now, knowing it ends at death. We are striving just to make ourselves be as happy as possible for this very short existence. And that means stacking our life with materialism. It means stacking our life with heaps of money, and that becomes our security. We look for promotions. We look for power. We look for these things that somehow are going to elevate us, make an impression on other people, and we're hoping that will be our eternity. People remember us. But ultimately, if death is the end, death is the end. The clock is ticking and it cannot be beaten. And Christ calls us to receive eternal life and receive a completely new way of looking at the way we live now. In Jesus' words, where he says, the first become last and the last become first. When you understand you've received eternity, the things that were once important will now not be important. And things that were not once important will now become important to you. Sometimes with AFL games, you don't watch the game live, so you'll watch a replay later. And I remember a couple of times I've had particularly my dad will come around and we'll watch a replay of a football game. And the rule is, if you're coming to watch the replay, you're not allowed to know what the result is so we can watch it together not knowing. But this one particular time, Dad came to watch the Fremantle Dockers play on my TV, and he admitted that he found out what the result was. Now, I was happy to watch the game with him as long as he didn't tell me what the result was, kept it secret. The game went on, it got to the third quarter and things were looking bad. We were down by what it seemed to be 5 or 6 goals and we were playing terribly. And as that clock was ticking down, I was very aware we were about to lose this game. And I said to my dad out loud, I said, this is terrible. We're doing so badly. And there's my dad, just sitting there calmly watching the game. And I realised at that point, the reason my dad was calmly watching this game, the reason my dad hadn't stood up and walked out and gone home, is he knew the result. And sure enough, as the game played on, the Fremantle Dockers came back and had this amazing comeback to win the game. When you know the result, it changes the way you see the game. The rich young ruler is called to change the way he sees life, because that is what eternal life is all about.